Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
I'm Hilary Dickman, a parent of two and Senior Assistant Director of Admission at Colorado College.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good afternoon, friends. I'm always in a great mood when I get to meet with our listening family, and today is no exception. No big preamble today, though. I'm just going to dive right in and let you know what we have for you today in today's episode. So we have two questions from listeners. So we have a question that John sent in, which is really a response to a question that Chris and I answered from Dave from Virginia. Sent in a question about admitted scores versus enrolled scores and how to know which test scores you should look at. So we've got that question from John. I'm going to start out with that. I'm going to fly solo on that. I have a bunch of stories to tell. So if you like my stories, you might like what I have to say. If you don't, well, too bad, because I have stories on that one. And then Hilary's got a question as well that we're going to answer. And this has to do with a mom who's concerned about a student that got 2 C's in dual enrollment courses, and how is that going to be interpreted in the admission process? That's a shorter question, so we're going to get 2 questions in today. And then I'll read my Chronicle article, after Hilary's question. It's the 10th of 11th, so we're almost done. It's from a professor from Rutgers this time. And then we do have that brand new interview I sussed out on Monday. I couldn't promise it because technology can fail. It's with Owen Blight. Owen is the Dean of Admissions at Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island. He's also the acting Associate Vice Provost of Enrollment Management. And we do a really deep dive on Providence that's going to run over the next 4 episodes. So today you'll hear part 1 of 4 of that interview. But without any further ado, let's transition and play John's question, which is a response to Dave's question that Chris and I answered within the last 2 weeks.
Hi, Mark. Good morning. Name is John. Longtime listener. Love the show. Just listened to today's episode, Thursday, July 2. You guys got a question which asked whether one should whether one should consider the admitted student range or the enrolled student range. And you and your guest discussed that. You guys went off on some tangents about, under-resourced situations, blah, 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 and never answered the question. It was a little frustrating. Would appreciate if we could benefit from your answer, which was something a lot of us have been wondering, whether we should focus on judge our applicants on where they fall within the admitted student test score range or the enrolled student test score range at a particular school. Thanks.
All right, friends, you know that I'm always honest and transparent and straightforward with you. And so today's no exception. So I'm going to be honest, I didn't really like John's question at first. I really didn't. Sometimes you're kind of more proud of your work than others. And I was really happy with how Chris and I answered that question. In fact, Dave followed up afterward to say the answer was really helpful. And so my reaction at first was kind of a mixture of disagreement or even aggravation. But then I stopped and I thought about it. And I thought about a lot of things. One, I thought, Stuck, don't be so defensive. Like, one thing someone taught me a long time ago, they say, let your critics be your unpaid counselors. People pay big money for consultants to help them improve. Like, how can you learn from this? So that was my first reaction. And then I thought about something that I've never said on the podcast, but I think about it a lot. So I don't know if our newer listeners may not know this, but I was a preacher for 15 years. That's right. I was a preacher from the mid 80s all the way till 2000. And then I said, education's going to be my ministry and my calling. And I really transitioned and have been doing this work ever since. But there's a famous saying that anyone in the pulpit knows, and people outside the pulpit may know it as well. And it goes like this: a mist in the pulpit is a fog in the pew. A mist in the pulpit is a fog in the pew. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's kind of a well-known axiom in homiletics or preaching or proverb. And it means that if a preacher is unclear, muddled, or vague in the pulpit, the confusion multiplies for the congregation listening. A small haze at the source becomes a thick fog by the time it reaches the listener. So you'll hear this, it's often revoked as a reminder that clarity in communication, whether it be writing, teaching, speaking, has to start with the speaker. And any lack of clarity on their end is going to get amplified, not reduced, as it travels to the audience. So that's where that comes from. And I actually think it's very profound, and I think it's actually apropos here. So I started thinking to myself, okay, we get 6,000 listeners that hear each episode. And if you're confused, we get like 45,000 to 50 a month, but that's all episodes. Each episode is like 6,000. So I said to myself, well, what if 10% of the people feel the way John feels? That's 600 people that felt like they never got an answer. That's a lot of people. So then my attitude softened. And I said, I'm going to take this question on. We can't answer every question that comes in. We get too many to do that. We try to do most. I said, not only am I going to take this one, I'm going to take it and I'm going to move it up quickly to the top of the line because it's fresh on people's minds if they remember that episode. We just did it. So then my attitude went from acceptance over time to exhilaration. So let me explain. So this question actually presents a perfect opportunity for me to explain something that's really, really important. And what you get from me in this podcast, or Julia or Susan or Hilary, Andy, Lisa, Vince, anybody that you hear, you get the totality of our experiences. I've worked with 2,000 students, so everything you get is coming through that prism of those 2,000 students. All right, now before I make John apoplectic and think he's doing it again, let me just answer his question straightforwardly, but then I do need to give the context of why me or anyone else who is being responsible and doing their job is going to try to capture the nuance when a question like this is asked. So the quick answer to John's question is, if a college has admitted testing data and enrolled testing data, which they will, it's admitted testing data that they would be looking at. Right. And I explained to you the last time, with enrolled testing data is always going to be lower because the highest flyers in your applicant pool are going to be hardest to yield, and they're going to have a lot of choices. So that's going to be true pretty much for every school. Your admitted profile will be a higher testing profile than your enrolled testing profile. So if I was to look at any one source of data, just to give John a straightforward answer, it's going to be admitted data. But John's question was so important that we elevated it to the title of this episode. One thing I don't think I've ever explained. If you look at the titles of our episodes, there's kind of, from a listener standpoint, there may not be any rhyme and reason, because one time a title might come from the interview, another time it might come from a hot topic in the news. We haven't been doing that many of those lately. We used to do a lot of them. Another time it might come from a question from a listener. Okay, it could come from a college spotlight. It could come from any of those. So I'll just be really transparent. I went and looked at our data, and I noticed that there is a correlation between the titles and how many listeners we get. So I've actually learned that titles are pretty important. So I try to pick the title that I think would have the broadest appeal to the largest number of people. So when I looked at all the content for today's episode, I said, I actually think this is probably the title that would probably appeal to the most. So then the exhilaration popped in, because I realized, okay, this is a really unique opportunity that I have to explain something that I think will be helpful to a lot of people. Why I believe that nobody's really doing their job in admissions when asked testing questions like this if they don't capture the nuance. And so, like I said in the intro, I've got a lot of stories, so you get a lot of stories. All right, my first story, and it's dated, it's 2004, but just because it's 22 years old, it's just as accurate today as it was 22 years ago. So when I was at the Westtown School, you regular listeners know Susan was the director of admission there for over 2 decades. I worked closely with her for close to 1 decade. And one of the things we would do is we took students to college fairs. We actually started our own college fair, but we took students to college fairs. And 2 very common fairs we would go to. One was a really big one. We'd go every year. It was at Villanova University. And then we would go to the Colleges That Changed Lives fair. But this story goes back to the Villanova fair. So I'd be on the bus with the students, and then they'd do what you do at college fairs. You go around and you talk to admission officers. So I was with a student, junior in the junior class, and she went up to Cornell's table, and I was just with her, and I wasn't like being her father or anything. I just was talking to her for a while and happened to be with her. So she goes up, and Cornell used to have a very legendary college counselor. His name was Lloyd. Everybody kind of in the business knew Lloyd. So she comes up to Lloyd and she says, "What are your average test scores?" To which Lloyd says, and he's very charismatic, he said, "You can ask me any question and I will answer it. But the one question I won't answer is, what are our average test scores?" And then Lloyd puts it back on the student. And he says, "Now what if I tell you our average test scores?" And he threw out a number. This is 22 years ago, so I don't remember what the number was. But, let's just make a number up for now. If I tell you our average test scores are 1440, what does that mean to you? And then the student says, "It means I need to have a 1440 if I want to get here." He said, "That's exactly why I will not answer that question, because it is so prone to misinterpretation. That is not what our average test scores should tell everybody, but that's exactly how they interpret it." Okay, that's first story. Second story. I was talking to a senior level person at Yale, an admission office. And, this was, just at the time when, Yale had gone test optional, like a lot of people during the earlier part of the pandemic. And if you looked at Yale's middle 50% on an ACT, you'll see like 33 to 35, 34 to 35. Like you'll see really high numbers. So my question to the senior level Yale admission rep was, I know you read in context, and a lot of people tell students that if you're in the middle of the testing profile, you should submit, or if you're above the 50% or above the 75, you should submit. But how does that advice take into context people coming from underserved or underrepresented areas? To which the Yale officer said, "Exactly." And this is what she said to me. "I handle the Appalachian region. If I got a 31 ACT out of the Appalachian region, I would do a cartwheel because it's probably the highest score that we will see in 5 years." So that's story number 2. So that's below the 25th percentile. And she's saying, "I'll do a cartwheel over it." So that's what whole person's admission is. It takes into context the applicant and their background when you read a file. And you read a file through the prism of the opportunities that the person has. But my experience is that is not how students think. They think very linearly, and so do parents. And even taking that question on that Dave asked, to me, it was a little fraught with a little bit of danger, because I know how prone it is to misinterpret. If I tell people, "Oh, you're going to look at admitted scores," then there's going to be a person that's going to say, "Snap, I'm not in the admitted score range, so I'm not applying." And that is not how most schools pretty much all schools would want you to interpret that data. And that would not be a correct interpretation of that data. So I'm going to give you an example of linear thinking. So this is story number 3. I was working with a student a few years ago, very good test taker, very impressive student with what the student had done when it comes to computer science. He'd been doing extremely impressive extracurriculars since middle school. A student was very interested in going to MIT or to Carnegie Mellon, which if you know anything about computer science, you know that those two schools are as hard as any in the country to get into. And also, computer science was absolutely booming with applicants, prior to recently. So this is in the heyday, the peak, the zenith of like applicants to computer science. So I tried to prepare him for the fact that I don't think that MIT or Carnegie Mellon, are, they're not probables, and they may not even be possible schools. Okay, they might be more in that long shot range. He listened to me, but he was a little perplexed. Make a long story short, he doesn't get into MIT. He doesn't get into Carnegie Mellon. He's a very strong applicant. He's at an Ivy League school right now that he got in, by the way, in regular admission. So and he's happy at his Ivy League school. We were just talking and we were reflecting. And then all is said and done, and he's happy. He's got over the gut punch of like not getting into Carnegie Mellon or MIT. And I said to him, I'm not going to say his name, but I said, student, I'm really curious, like, why were you so confident that you were going to get into MIT and Carnegie Mellon, like when you first started working with me? And I'll never forget his answer. He said, well, I had a 1580 on the SAT, and I looked up their numbers, and a 1580 was like right in the acceptable range. So I had the qualifications. So this is very pervasive thinking that you experience in the counseling room. So when you're explaining this sort of thing, it's like admissions malpractice, in my opinion, and I think our entire co-host staff would agree with this. If you don't unpack it and put in context, how scores are used. Now, admission officers are very, very conscious of the fact that, and college counselors as well, they don't want to dissuade an applicant that they would be very excited to have because the applicant gets psyched up. Yeah, I just thought of a sick story. So when Susan and I ran our college fair, we required admission officers to come. They couldn't send a parent. They couldn't send, an alumni. They had to send an admission officer. And some years, the entire Ivy League would send an admission officer, which is unheard of. So I was having a conversation with the Harvard rep, and Banks, he's been there forever. And he said to me, Roger Banks is his name. He's been there like 40 years, still at Harvard. I can say this. It's not something that's confidential. So we were talking about what the challenges are at Harvard. And he said, you know what the biggest challenge at Harvard is in admissions? Is so many people get intimidated by the name that they don't even apply. They psych themselves out. And some of these kids are kids we would love to have. And by the way, he was talking about because it looks like they don't have the test score that we publish. So there's another story for you. And by the way, it's not just, like I've given you both sides of the spectrum, right? It's not like the under-resourced or the rural student, Appalachian student, or student from underrepresented background, first gen, that doesn't need to have scores that the well-resourced students have to be an exciting applicant. It can be the other example. Like that other student was a very well-resourced student, getting a sense of false confidence. So it's like, the point is, errors are made on both sides, over-interpreting the scores. So I often say scores knock you out, but they don't get you in. And another thing I say is, at a highly selective school, scores are not talked about anywhere near as much as people think, right? Common refrain, scores count more than we say, but less than you think, which is true, by the way. But I'll tell you my last story. Rick Clark, VP of Enrollment at Georgia Tech, and a professional friend of mine. I mean, Georgia Tech's only 25 minutes away. Rick and I get together at least every other year, grab a lunch, talk shop. Just, I got to spend 2 hours with him when I was in Florida, which was really cool. And I was talking with Rick about testing, and he was like, you know what would surprise applicants? Testing almost never comes up in committee. It almost never comes up. We just glance at the scores, and as long as they're in range, we'll talk about every other thing. Now, that does not mean if they were extremely low, it wouldn't be problematic. You just heard me say testing can knock you out. But most of the people figure out I don't have a profile that's close to this school A, then so they don't apply. So most of the people that apply are in range. Now, another thing I can tell you that indicates to me, and this happens every year, that people put more emphasis on scores and they don't understand quite how scores work. I'll have a student that has like a 1500 in the SAT and then they'll get a 1520 and then they'll say to me, do we need to talk about having a brand new list? And they think that just like moving up 20 points all of a sudden means now they're qualified for a whole bunch of new set of schools. So it's just important to unpack this and the context, because if you just make a statement, even if I would have just said admitted scores, non-enrollment scores, and left it, dropped the mic, no more talk, that would be so prone to misinterpretation. Some people would get overconfident. Oh, I have those scores. Some people would be psyched out of applying because, well, I don't have those scores, so why should I apply? So it's just, I think nuance is important, because if you don't capture nuance, then you really mislead people. So I can understand why John, he made a comment, all this talk about all these underrepresented or resourced. Yeah, I'm trying to explain the full context so that people don't misinterpret data. So that's why I answered it the way that I did. And hopefully this clarification helped. I'm really glad John sent this question in, because he gave me an opportunity to talk about something that I think is so often misunderstood. And hopefully this conversation clarifies it. So without any further ado, let's transition to the second question. And Hilary joins me to answer this one.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, we've got a great question here about dual enrollment classes. I'm going to play the question, and Hilary's with me today. Hi, Hilary.
Hi.
And then we'll get Hilary's feedback.
Hi, YCBK. I've got a question for you guys. My daughter, who's normally an A student, took a couple of dual enrollment classes that didn't go so well, and she got C's. Obviously, that's bringing down her high school GPA, and it'll be on her high school transcripts. But we were wondering if there's a way to avoid having those grades transfer over to the college that she ends up going to, and starting off her college career with those grades in her college GPA. Ideally, she would just leave them behind on her high school transcript and not have to submit college transcripts when she applies to schools. Is that possible? And if she has to still submit transcripts, will those grades carry over, or do we have to formally request a transfer, which we would not want to do, obviously? Love to hear what you think. Thanks.
Why don't you kick this one off, Hilary?
Yeah, thanks so much for this question about your daughter's transfer credits. My experience is at CC and other small liberal arts colleges, so this may not apply depending on where your daughter is planning to go to school, is that you have to request the transfer credit after you've enrolled, and you do it through the registrar, not through the admission office. And if you go, like for us, if you go to our website and you search transfer credits, you'll go straight to the registrar's page and it'll tell you exactly how to walk through that process. And at CC, when you transfer credit in, it's just the credit and not the grade. So the grade isn't going to impact your GPA, which can be really nice, I think, for students. That's how we treat study abroad credit also, which is great, because often students will study abroad and their grades kind of tank because it's hard or they're having too much fun or whatever. And so to not have those grades impact your GPA is pretty nice. I think it's possible that it works differently at public schools, especially if you're going to like your state flagship and you're taking dual enrollment classes that are like part of your sort of state university system. I think it might be different. But Mark, you probably know more about that.
I see what you said as the most common thing out there, but there are some schools that, and some of them will warn you that, all these dual enrollment classes are great, but we see those grades and they do factor into our rating. And sometimes people don't always take them that seriously. And you just need to know that side of it. So we see
it. If they come up on your high school transcript, we're going to see the grades when we're reviewing you for admission. But that's different from whether or not it's going to be included in your GPA at Colorado College, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I think there are sort of two sides to that.
No. That's very important. Yeah. So are they in your college GPA? Almost always no.
Yeah. Right, right,
I
right.
don't know of any cases, but do they factor into the academic review?
Yes.
Yes. And that is something that sometimes people need to be aware of, and they're not always aware of, especially if they, dual enrollment, dual credits becoming so much more popular. People are taking them at younger ages. They may not always be as mature. And so, this also can come up for middle school courses that are considered college courses that go on to the transcript. It can also come up there as well. Courses like Spanish 1, Spanish, I say Spanish, but it could be any foreign language year 1 or 2. Sometimes people take those in middle school. Sometimes kids take things like Algebra 1, Geometry, which are really considered high school classes. They can take those in middle school. Like those are part of, you kind of can't have it both ways. Well, yeah, they count toward credits, but then if they're bad, there's no impact at all. But just keep in mind, every school does read your application backwards with more of an emphasis on what's recent versus not recent. And so, there's very few schools that kind of are going to get blown out of contention by a ninth grade. Of course, there are about a dozen or so that, might be different than that. And it depends how bad it is. Are we talking Fs or, Cs? Like very different, right? But
I also wanted to say that if the student, I'm just going to use Psych 101 as my example, right? If the student took Psych 101 as a dual enrollment class and got a C in it, you can transfer that and get credit for it. But I would encourage the student, if you're interested in that class, once you get to your college, take it again, because you're going to have a different experience when you're surrounded by college students with a professor at the college that you chose, especially if it's not a huge lecture kind of format class. Also, you might need the information from that class. If you're going to go on to be a psych major or a neuroscience major or whatever, you might need that information because it's going to be built upon for future classes. So that's one of the things that I think about dual enrollment classes or concurrent enrollment and APs also. While you can get credit for those classes, sometimes you're going to have a very different experience taking what I'm going to put in quotes here, the same class once you're on your college campus, and to be open to that and not just totally attached to the idea of using that class that you took in high school for credit in college.
Yeah, well said. I don't think I have any much to add to this, Hilary. I can't believe I'm speechless. It doesn't happen very often.
I would add one more thing for this mom. You and your student, your daughter, should look at the college list, go to each of those colleges' websites and see how credits transfer and what the process is for that, because it might be, identical across all of the schools. There might be nuances that are different at some of the schools. And I think those are smart things to know in advance.
Yeah, and that's true for everything. You should know if CLEP courses transfer. You should know dual enrollment, dual credit courses transfer. You should know what AP score you need to get, what IB score you need to get. And a lot of times that differs from subject to subject. But almost always colleges have this information on their website. They're going to get asked it over and over and over again. So you'd be crazy not to. You're reducing some of your required manpower to answer the phone a million times on the question. So most of the time that's spelled out on college's website, their policies on these things. So look it up and know that in advance, and look it up school by school. I talked about this half a year or so ago. It can make a incredible difference what those policies may be in terms of how many credits you may start with. And increasingly, as part of people's financial strategy, more and more.
For sure. We hear that a lot.
Coming in with a full semester. I'm coming in with a full year. I'm coming in with that.
Or I'm coming in with an associate's degree and I want to get out in 2 years.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Do you hear that more now than when you first started doing this, Hilary?
I don't think I do, but my first year I was recruiting at a lot of early colleges, high schools, where all the students graduate with an associate's degree. And those students are part of their plan is to only go to college for 2 years. And that's not possible at a place like CC, and lots of Our peer institutions, you can only bring in 1 year of credit and start with sophomore standing, because we believe that the experience you're going to have here is different from the experience that you had taking those classes in high school. And we want you to have more of that, not just 2 years.
Thanks, Hilary. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, friends, let's transition to an article that, if you're a regular listener, you're getting pretty familiar with me reading now, because I've read it 10 straight episodes in a row, and it's called How Bad is Higher Ed's Budget Crunch? 11 entries from different people. Chronicle does such a good job of picking them, and we're up to number 10 of 11. And this time we've got a college professor, and you can tell it's written by a college professor. It's by Rebecca Collins-Given, and she's an associate professor in the School of Management, Labor Relations at Rutgers. And she's also president of Rutgers AAUP/AFT and serves on the steering committee of the Higher Ed Labor United. Now, this is what Rebecca says. And by the way, her entry is entitled, Austerity Isn't Enough. Austerity isn't enough. We cannot address the current situation of tight budgets with the same old austerity approaches. Administrators seem to only have one tool in their toolbox, and it no longer suffices for many of us who work in higher ed. We commit to our colleges for decades. We doggedly serve the mission of the school, while a rotating cast of administrators comes and goes, often appearing more concerned with securing their next job than furthering our commitment to an investment in teaching, research, and service. She's preaching. We will not persuade state or federal governments to reinvest in public higher education without working together to demand a better, broader, and deeper vision of accessible, robust colleges. We can and we must fight for increased Pell Grants, renewed federal research funding, significant state support for our colleges that makes an education truly accessible to all. Administrators and faculty and staff, especially through their unions, must commit to a vision where colleges offer a broad curriculum and value the pursuit of knowledge, discovery, and innovation, not only short-sighted career readiness. We cannot retreat from offering an undergraduate education that is broad in scope, emphasizes critical thinking, prepares students to be full thinking members of their communities, in addition to being successful in their careers. Terminating classes, departments, and programs based on low enrollment betrays the core mission of advancing knowledge and curiosity across all fields, regardless of the popularity or marketability. Now is the time for colleges to recommit to their fundamental mission and raise their expectations to match the expectations of those who labor here. We can and must fight for public investment that allows us to serve all students across the broadest spectrum of academic fields with a renewed commitment to true academic freedom and secure employment for those who further this mission and serve our students day in and day out. So listen, the Chronicle articles are behind a paywall. So if I'm going to read them, I really feel the need to put a plug in for them. It is the best single source I find on higher ed. I pay $10 a month for a membership to get access to like multiple articles every single day. So I would recommend it if you're looking to keep abreast of what's going on in higher ed. You know, $10 can't even get you lunch these days. So, you know, I don't get a penny from the Chronicle, but I really, truly believe in what they're doing. And, you know, reading stuff behind a paywall that I feel the need to at least recommend that you make an investment if it's, you know, if you find value to it. All right, friends, we are transitioning to a brand new interview. And I'm excited because I really did a deep dive. And I get excited when I feel like we captured the essence of the college. That's always my goal. Capture the essence of the college. I love it when someone tells me they heard a spotlight and it just gave them so much insight into the school, or they ended up at a school because of a spotlight. Or I love it when admission officers, you know, say that you just nailed it in that conversation. That's more like the visit feedback ones. Of course, they're going to say they nailed it when I'm interviewing them. But yeah, you're going to hear from Owen Blight. He's a graduate of Rutgers. He's been there for close to 2 decades, multiple promotions. And without any further ado, let's transition to my interview with Owen Blight.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in the first part of my interview with Owen Blight, Owen gives his backstory, and we spend about half of part 1, maybe even more, just really looking at the Catholic roots of Providence. What does it mean for it to be the only college in the country run by Dominican friars? How does that shape the culture of the school? And then we get into their civ curriculum. What is the civ curriculum? What do students like about it? What do they not like about it? And then we start something that I will continue for part 2 and part 3, but I share perceptions that my students have of Providence that I've worked with over the years. And I ask Evan, does he agree or disagree? And I go through about 10 of them, so Evan gives his thoughts and feedback on the first one today. So I hope you enjoy part 1 of 4. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Owen Blight, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Providence College. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Owen.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you've got a popular school and one that our listeners are interested in knowing more about. So, yeah, we're going to kind of talk about a couple of topics today, friends. We're going to talk about just sort of Catholic education, and then we'll get really more into Providence. Obviously, the two are going to kind of bleed together, and that's totally understandable. But we always like to start by knowing the backstory of everybody. So, Owen, say anything that will help our listeners understand the context from which you're going to speak.
Sure. So my kind of career in admission actually got started at Providence College, and it is the only place that I have worked at and know well. A little over 17 years ago, I graduated from Providence, and during my time as a student, I was one of our tour guides and ambassadors and was working with prospective students and had that curiosity, and was also a political science major and studying economic development and how cities form in different neighborhoods of college campuses. And that got me curious about higher ed as kind of more than somewhere you just spend 4 years. And when I graduated, the economy wasn't great. There was a position available at Providence, so I said, I'll give it a try, see what it's like to work in admission. And then I've been fortunate to kind of move up through the past 16 years, and currently serve as the interim associate vice president for enrollment management. But for the last 4 years, I've also been the dean of undergraduate admission here at the college. So it's a place I love and feel passionately about. Though my perhaps resume professional experience is only here, I've also had the opportunity to serve as in a number of different organizations, whether it be working with the National Catholic College Admission Association, our New England affiliate, and also a version of our professional organization in Rhode Island. So really excited to kind of share some of the expertise and perhaps anecdotes I've learned through the years with you all today.
Sounds great. Yeah. And I think it'll be helpful for you to position Providence in its unique way, but also speak to Catholic education in general.
Providence is pretty uniquely positioned. We are the only one in the country that's run by the Dominican friars. So in the grand kind of scheme of hundreds of Catholic colleges throughout the U.S., the Dominicans, the friars, have a college in Rhode Island and a high school in Chicago. And so when you think about kind of their role in higher ed within this country, we're it. So that brings a really kind of unique proposition for prospective students and really kind of helps to distinguish us. And I can talk some more about kind of the role that the Dominicans play here on campus, but I think that is a unique place that we hold.
Well, that was one of my questions. So yeah, so you teed it up nicely. So why don't you talk about the role the Dominicans play and what distinctively you feel they add to the educational experience?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm happy to do that. I feel like, especially within higher education, maybe the first one that folks think of are the Jesuits, or certainly with the election of the new Pope, the Augustinians have been kind of having some time in the spotlight. But the Dominicans are no stranger to education, but definitely a little perhaps less represented. So quick, though I'm no theology major, quick kind of background. About 800 years ago, St. Dominic, founded the Order of Preachers, and through that time kind of has evolved in a number of different ways. But what that means for us is a little over 105 years ago, founded Providence College. And when you look at kind of how the Dominicans impact our campus, I think there's a few ways. One is just by the quantity of their presence. We have about 45 friars who live right on campus, about half teaching, half in more administrative roles. Those who teach are often where you'd expect: theology, philosophy, but there's a biologist, a political scientist, an economist, so some kind of diversity there. And then others are involved with student life. So maybe serving in residence life or financial aid or different areas across campus. And I think, so the presence of the friars is one thing that I think provides a sense of welcome for students of all different faith backgrounds. But I think it also provides some great kind of ministering opportunities for students of different faith backgrounds or those who are identifying as Catholic to grow in their faith. So presence, I think, is one of the big things. When it gets down to the actual order itself and kind of perhaps their approach, I think it's best reflected by the college's motto, which is Veritas and truth. And we're not the only school to kind of hold this as our motto, but I think the way that we perhaps approach it could be a bit distinctive. I often like to ask people to think about kind of what the friars look like. You think of them in their white robes, or if your first introduction to us is through athletics, you see our logo, it's black and white. And it may just be that you think that's because those are two kind of like sharp colors, but really it's grounded in the Dominican idea of black and white, two very different sides of an issue. And Dominicans approach this by asking, how can we pull from both sides to discover what the truth is? And so you'll see that even in some of our classrooms. There's a Dominican idea called disputatio. And I am, again, no expert on academic pedagogy, but you'll find that some of our faculty members, whether they be lay or Dominican, structure their seminars in a way where they're discussion oriented, where they're not to discredit one side or perhaps bolster another, but to instead find where the truth lies in all the varying viewpoints. It's not even just academic. We have a series, I guess you would call it, on campus called Difficult Dialogues, where we talk about some of the topics that you may expect a Catholic college to shy away from. And I'm not saying that we're not going to kind of represent what the Catholic side of it is. Obviously, we're going to adhere to church teaching, but knowing kind of what both sides of these conversations look like is important for our students to have the experience to see what fruitful dialogue about tough issues in the world, in their ethics, in democracy, seeing kind of what a civil dialogue in our political sphere looks like. I think those are things that hold value, and all of those are just a few examples of things that are really kind of grounded in that Dominican background.
So let's talk a little bit more about sort of the student experience, though, and like what are some very specific ways in which faith and academics are integrated, and how does a student experience the impact of the Dominican background as a student at Providence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of different ways. So when you start kind of thinking about student life, I think one of the most logical places where you would expect to find this would be within the chapel and within campus ministry. And so we're proud to have a very robust campus ministry program that is really kind of an umbrella group for a number of different efforts, whether it be things like OCIA to bring kind of those into the church through baptism or confirmation, but it may also be elderly outreach or working with youths in the neighborhood who need mentoring and support, a number of service initiatives, social initiatives, retreats. All of those sort of things kind of fall under campus ministry, including ways to not just kind of engage, but also maybe to perhaps grow as a leader. So a really robust peer ministry program. All of these things are open to students of all different backgrounds. And so about 60% of our students identify as Catholic. And so when you transition to thinking about kind of the approach that we take for students with their faith life, I heard one of our friars describe it in this way, that they hope that all students take just kind of one step wherever they are. We have some students who are going to the chapel and going to Eucharistic adoration every day, and you could perhaps term them some of the most devout. We also have students who maybe checked the box on their Common App and said they were Catholic, but it's not something they've engaged with in a long time. And so the Dominicans, they're not saying this kind of explicitly, but their invitation to students is for those who are maybe checking the box, like, maybe don't even come to Mass. Stop by the post-Mass bash and just kind of see how it feels to be in that space and feel that community. They also have ways to serve those who are kind of as committed and devout as possible. And so I think where they kind of pride themselves is meeting students where they are, and inviting them to serve as a resource in that way. Now, that's kind of student life and direct ways to get involved with campus ministry and everything. I think the benefit of a Catholic college is that you're also going to find some more kind of environmental things. You're going to find that it's a comfortable and a supportive environment where a student can have different opportunities, whether they're looking for them or not. So as an example, every one of our athletics teams has a chaplain assigned to them. And many of our student athletes will go through all 4 years of competition and perhaps never kind of use that resource. But for those who are looking for it, it's there for them. So it's kind of the pleasant surprise of finding places when a student is ready to engage with that. What is that kind of one step that a student could take?
I have a story. It's embarrassing, but it's humorous. So you probably have heard of the school called Belmont Abbey outside of Charlotte. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what, if they're Augustinian. I know they're not Jesuit. I'm not sure what the branch they are, but they were recruiting my youngest daughter for basketball. So they invited us to come to watch a game. And there was like a monk dressed in black, like walking around. And he was like behind the girls' bench. And it like freaked my daughter out. She's like, I can't come here. That guy is scary.
Absolutely. So, and that's what's such an important part of a college search. Like we actually, at our fall open house, we have a session that's called What's with All Those Guys in White Robes? Because many people, their introduction to Providence is perhaps through Division I athletics, or they've heard that we have one of the newest and fastest growing nursing programs. And so they think Providence. They don't think of it as God's divine providence. They think of it as the city, and we're named after both. And so they show up here and they're like, what are all those guys in white robes? And some of the Dominicans introduce what that means. But it's why I say it's such an important part of the college search is because, as I mentioned, there's 45 who are here, and some students that's not for them. And it's an important thing to see what feels right, because when we go back to kind of Catholic education overall, oftentimes it can be something that people criticize and perhaps focus in on negatively. But I think kind of also one of the delightful things is that many of us approach it in a very different way. And while I sometimes pause when I get the question at a college fair, like, how Catholic are you? There's a truth behind that. There are some schools that feel it's something that best lives in their mission statement and it's their founding principles, but you're not going to engage with it as much when you're on campus. And there's others who are requiring students to go to Mass and perhaps requiring Bible study. And so for prospective students, it's important to ask that question, what is with all those guys? Or how Catholic are you? And though you can't assign a value to it, like in a ranking system, I think knowing kind of what level you're looking for and what's going to best support you is a key element when exploring not just Catholic higher education, but a faith-based education.
So let's throw that out there. So how Catholic are you, Owen? Like, how would you...
Told you, I'm not going to give you a number.
Sure.
I would say a couple things. If you go to our 10:30 p.m. Mass on Sunday night, if you're not there 15 minutes early, you're going to be standing. It's packed. There's a large community there. You're going to find Mass celebrated on campus 4 or 5 times a day. And as part of our liberal arts cord, which is common with many institutions, we're expecting students to take 2 theology courses. One of them will almost certainly be focused on Catholicism, but also there's a number of major world religions that are taught on campus. So ways to explore either the intersection of Catholicism and other faiths, or other faiths kind of in isolation as well. So I'd say we're in between, but also like there's 45 fraggers walking around. You're going to find a crucifix in the majority of classrooms. We're going to celebrate Mass as part of our commencement exercises, but it's the day before and it's an invitation for students and families. It's not a required part of it. So we're not somewhere that is ever going to kind of apologize for who we are.
Yeah.
But we're also, our president actually described it well at Admitted Student Day. We also have no interest in being kind of a fortress for the devout. We're not just somewhere where we want students to show up who are only looking for that in isolation, because that's not what we offer.
Who do you think of as having a really big C in their, Catholicism. So like, I think of Notre Dame. Would you think of, is that one that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think there's some that definitely the first thing you perhaps think of when you think of kind of Catholic education, places like Notre Dame, Steubenville, perhaps Ave Maria. There's some where that is kind of the leading part of their value proposition, I guess, if you will. Yeah.
And who else would you say would be some of the schools that might be more well known? Like I'll tell you, I interviewed Grant Gosselin. You probably know Grant, right? Do you? I'm
Yeah,
assuming
sure.
Yeah. So I interviewed him. By the way, listeners, if you missed that great interview, Dean of Undergraduate Admission at Financial Aid. So I asked him this question, and I said, I just gave him feedback from some of my students who had visited Boston College. And I said, they will often report that the seat is in the Catholic seat feels a little bigger at Boston College than some schools. Would he agree? And he said he does agree with that. So I don't know sort of how you see them on the continuum, but then you have like, for example, Georgetown, Villanova, some of the, more well-known schools with, of course, the 26 Jesuit schools. It's just, I'm asking this because if you're Catholic, you're all in on Catholic education. But if you're not Catholic, people oftentimes are trying to figure out, is it too Catholic for me? Or would I feel comfortable there? And that's oftentimes the way it's phrased to me. And sometimes, like, I'll have a student that might feel comfortable at Georgetown and might not at Boston College. I don't know if that surprises you, but this is just feedback that I get from students. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me at all. I think, and I think that's the important part, is that it's the student telling you kind of how they feel. Like, I am rarely going to tell a student exactly whether I think, at least from the Catholic standpoint, I will do it academically, I will do it financially, we will provide counseling on all sides. But I think this is such a personal thing that even if you and I, assuming you were a prospective student, were to have hours of conversation about your faith development and everything, I still don't know that that's something where we can really provide any sort of accurate guidance. I think that's something that a student needs to do themselves.
No, that makes sense. In some ways, it's almost like saying, like, how beautiful is your campus? I want to know if it's beautiful enough. Like, there's an aspect in which it's the experience and it's in the eye of the beholder, right? So, let's transition and just talk about some other things about Providence. So you have your Civ curriculum. Talk to us about that. What do students like about it? What are some of the things that maybe they would change if they had the power to do so? Tell us a little bit more about the Civ curriculum.
Sure, absolutely. So for those who are not familiar, we have a program here called the Development of Western Civilization, which has been really the cornerstone of our core curriculum for the better part of 40 or 50 years. And it is essentially a program that does exactly what it says. It traces the development of the Western world. And it's a 4-semester program, which I think is where you see kind of some of the weight come into it. 3 semesters of it are chronological. So you're starting with Greece and ancient Mesopotamia and antiquity. And on this chronological survey for 3 semesters, you're going all the way up towards modern times. Some sections, they're turning on CNN and they're talking about how they got to that point. It is the largest class that we offer on campus. You'll find about 70, 75 students per section, but that's because each section is being taught by 3 or 4 professors. So as you're doing this chronological survey, you're having faculty from history, philosophy, literature, theology, and also visiting faculty from maybe our art department or music, kind of bringing in cultural elements. You're having kind of faculty from those various areas talking about a specific event. And so you may have a larger lecture where the historian presents the facts of a certain time period or event in the development of the world. Then perhaps you'll bring in the literature professor who will offer a reading from the time, and the philosopher will talk about the movements that occurred as a result of that being written. And so it's a very difficult program. This is where, when you mention, like, would some students change things about it? Absolutely. I don't know many students who have gone through the 4 semesters of Civ and not at some point complained about it, but it's a rite of passage. I think what's tough about it is it's a very different way of thinking. And oftentimes in high school, students, they have their history class, they have their English class. Very rarely do all these different kind of disciplines intersect. And with Civ, they come crashing forward. So you'll have some larger lectures in that 70-person room, but at least once a week, you break down into smaller 15-person seminars to talk about how all of these things interact, to talk about kind of what happened in that time period. The fourth semester, so at the end of 3, you're done the chronological part, and the fourth semester is a colloquium. And this is where it kind of takes liberal arts, it takes it out of like liberal arts just for the sake of it. You could make the argument without the colloquium, Civ perhaps gives you a lot of facts that are good for Jeopardy. Colloquium starts to apply it towards your studies. So we'll welcome in faculty, let's say from the business school. And one that was offered last year was on the people, profits, and sustainability. So it's a business professor and a philosopher talking about the conflict that exists when certainly corporations are responsible to shareholders and must turn a profit, but also what's their responsibility to the planet and sustainability. There's another one on the science of politics and energy. It was a political science professor and I believe either engineering or physics professor talking about when energy first became a commodity, when the world decided to add a value to electricity and what that did for global conflicts. And so on a practical standpoint, it's nice because you could, if you're a political science major, you could go through a lot of your time perhaps engaging with just political science majors. It gets you with students who kind of think differently. And it also, though we don't use this term, it serves as sort of like a capstone for the Civ program, adds some applicability and kind of pulls it all together. And that's the part, even though we still have a Done with Civ barbecue where everyone celebrates being through the program at the end of their sophomore year and everything, I think the colloquium is really the thing where students, like, it all clicks and makes sense.
Awesome. So I'm going to do something that I've done with quite a few people I've interviewed. I did it with Grant. And this is where I share some impressions that my students have had about Providence. Sure. And it gives you a chance to either correct them if you disagree or elaborate on them if you agree. Does that work?
Great. Sounds good.
So let's start with this very strong business program that is very competitive and hard to get into. Talk to me about that.
I would agree with the first part. I would perhaps disagree with the second part, and I'll explain why.
Yeah.
Very strong, yes. ACSB accredited, so top level of business schools. It's very much a business school kind of dropped in a liberal arts college. So it's, I said kind of previously how when it's right for certain students, it's right. I would term it this way, like we'll have students who are maybe looking at us along with like a Babson, Bentley, Bryant, but those are very different experiences.
Right. I tend to think, like I oftentimes refer all 4 of those. When somebody wants business, wants small to mid-size, likes the Northeast, I usually give them Bentley, Bryant, Babson, and you to look at.
Yeah. And happy to be included on the list. I think what a student needs to expect when they're coming to us and what we think holds value is that kind of dropped in the liberal arts college sense. And they're going to, we say we invite them to engage with this liberal arts core. Sometimes for those business students who are only kind of solely focused on business, they see the core as a requirement and something to be checked off a list. So that's where there's a little bit of nuance there, but we think it still kind of holds tremendous value for students because especially when you think about artificial intelligence and the way that the business world is changing and is changing in ways that we don't even know yet, the ability to articulate and communicate, to not just kind of memorize generally accepted principles if you're an accounting major, but to really know how to process and think on your feet. I think that's something that we think is going to kind of have a long-term value. The piece I would correct that, or not correct, but maybe
I want you to do
you
that.
mentioned is the selective and hard to get into. And the only reason I add nuance there is because our only program that applications are reviewed separately is nursing. So when a student is applying to Providence and applying to the business school, they're not going through a separate admission committee or anything like that. Now certainly we'll look at their math preparation in the same way we would for like a chemistry major or anything, but you won't see kind of extreme differences in our acceptance rate in the same way you would with like nursing versus Providence overall.
And is it direct admit?
It's not, no. And you can come in, and if you come in undeclared and you want to become a finance major after one semester, like you can do that. So you'll either get started in business or as long as you have a 2.5 at some point in your time here, you can switch into it as well. And it's very common to maybe someone comes in as marketing, but they'll add that double major in history. They'll perhaps study health policy. The double majors rarely both live in the business school, but usually it's like one business and one of our other three schools.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Owen Blight, Dean of Admissions and Acting Associate Vice Provost of Dean of Enrollment at Providence College. Hope you join us next week for part 2 of 4. Friends, on Monday's episode, we got another question from a listener. Chris Terr is back to answer a question a listener sent in. And he got part 2 of Owen Blight. And in this part, we really get into impressions that my students have about Providence. And Owen either elaborates on the impression or he refutes it if he disagrees. I love his transparency. And that's what you'll get on Monday. So we hope you join us then. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your level of career success. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about YCBK on social media, and you help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating at yourcollegeboundkid.com and clicking the donate button. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. If you have a question or suggestion, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button and speak, and we will do our best to get your question or your comment in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admission and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-host, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, 2 admission officers from Colorado, Hilary Dickman from Colorado College, Kate Strickland from CU Boulder, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Carter DeLauro, a co-director of college counseling in New York, and Christina Lopez, the former Dean of Admission at Barnard College, and our international college specialist, Kevin Newton from Dallas, Texas. Our stupendous sound engineer who makes everything happen is Nemanja Matvic from Serbia. Our reliable webmaster is John Rooney. Website updates are done by Joy Stucker. Image editing by Vlad Honchar. And what would we do without our volunteers? Guy Pillsbury, Sony Patel, and Andy Bernstein are all helping us with podcast marketing. Carolyn Wood, Mark Doniger, and Carrie Roberts book interviews with thought leaders. Amanda Dugan, Colleen Sinoki, Nicole Resch, Trevor Smith, Ryan Stepler, and Lynn Labash send thank yous to interviewees. If you want a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, it's also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights and our upcoming events and receptions. And you can now do searches for past content by using our new Explore and Topics tabs. We really encourage you to explore our past content. We have close to 1,000 hours. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.